Part 2. Theoretical. Chapter 7. A Ground Plan of Illuminism. When we consider such a vast and ramifying subject as the supernormal sciences, some schematic classification is necessary, for they range from psychism to ceremonial magic, and from the mystic's divine union to pacts with non-human entities, who may or may not be the devil. Our first task in such an understanding should be to mark off our ground and differentiate it from the subject matter of natural science and the ordinary workaday world. This is no easy task, for no hard and fast line can be drawn. Who shall say when shrewdness becomes intuition and intuition becomes vision? Neither can we satisfactorily leave to natural science the physical plane and the observations that are made through the five physical senses. For the unseen, which is the acknowledged subject matter of esoteric science, interpenetrates the material plane as intimately as water interpenetrates the strata of the earth. The nearest approach to accuracy may be to say that occult science begins where natural science ends. This unquestionably is true as far as it goes, and is a useful practical definition. But unfortunately, the boundary line, though clearly marked, is not fixed, but resembles rather the line of demarcation between land and sea on a falling tide. Esoteric science must be distinguished from natural science by method rather than by subject matter. It starts from first principles on the spiritual plane and works downwards through mind into matter. Whereas natural science starts from the observation of phenomena on the physical plane and may, given as many eons as esoteric science has required for its development, which cannot justly be denied, eventually work upwards through mind into spirit. Natural science starts with data and deduces their form the principles that explain them. Esoteric science starts with the principles and looks for the phenomena which may be expected to ensue. The one is laboriously working out the correlation of units into an organic whole. The other is equally laboriously exploring the ramifications of primary principles. In the one, experiment must precede knowledge. In the other, knowledge must precede experiment. Although it's impossible to plot on a map the exact line of demarcation between land and sea, nevertheless, no one standing on the seashore would have any difficulty in seeing it. So although the clear-cut separation of exoteric from esoteric science is a thankless task, nevertheless, it's possible to indicate by a single word that which all its students will recognize as being the pursuit in which they are engaged. What, then, shall this single word be? It must be a word whose significance shall indicate the subject under consideration, but which shall not have been appropriated to the description of a partial aspect of that subject. Occultism will not do, because it excludes the mystic, and mysticism will not do, because it excludes the occultist. Neither is spiritualism a suitable term, for it has its definite connotation as signifying a particular aspect and method in these studies, and cannot conveniently be extended without causing confusion. Our subject is altogether in a parlous condition as regards nomenclature. Burdened on the one hand with a Sanskrit terminology which has been wrenched from its original significance by the usages of modern theosophy, and on the other hand by a barbarous jargon derived partly from the mysteries of Greece, partly from the Kabbalism of Israel, and partly from medieval alchemy, which employed bastard Latin to conceal its thoughts. Two other sources of illumination are also available, and throw much additional light on our subject: the voluminous literature of Christian mysticism, and the equally prolific analytical school of psychology. To these we might perhaps add more physics, whose findings are increasingly confirming what has hitherto been the exclusive preserve of occult cosmogony. Each of these schools of thought has its own terminology and its own system of classification, and some effort must be made in the near future to correlate them all if esoteric science is to come into its own. In the limited scope of these pages, no such attempt can be made, and indeed it's a work requiring the cooperation of specialists rather than the necessary generalized knowledge of a single mind. We may clear the ground by a preliminary survey, showing the subdivisions into which superphysical science naturally falls. None of these, however, are watertight compartments. For the pursuit of any one of them, a generalized knowledge of several others is essential. And although specialization is as necessary in this pursuit as in any other, if any high degree of achievement is to be reached, yet that specialization should include a sound general knowledge of the whole subject so that the work of other specialists may be appreciated and their gifts utilized as occasion requires. Since we've discarded the word occultism as a generic title for the field of our studies, we must endeavor to replace it by another. Our choice is limited, for the word chosen, as we have already seen, must convey an adequate mental picture to the outsider who looks up its meaning in a dictionary, and must not have been appropriated by any specialized school. In its essence, the whole subject under consideration is the extension of consciousness to the planes of experience which are not available for the physical senses. And out of that extended experience comes the whole gamut of supernormal experience. Might we not agree, then, to dominate the whole field by the term Illuminism and to subdivide it primarily into two branches, mysticism and occultism? Into these two divisions it will be found that all the different transcendental movements can be assigned as their affinities lean towards the one or the other. Let us now define further what we mean by these two terms. Mysticism aims at the speediest possible attainment of the divine union of the soul with its source. In order to achieve this, it eliminates all that causes separation. A cardinal doctrine in all mystic schools is that of unreality. Whenever we find a school of thought which distinguishes sharply between unreal and the real, and seeks to eliminate the former from consciousness in order to possess the latter, we shall be justified in classifying it as an essential mystical system. Occultism, on the other hand, accepts the phenomenal as actual enough, if not real, if we use the term real in its technical mystical sense as eternal and self-existing. The aim of the occultist is to organize and master phenomena and bring them into harmony with the eternal law of the real. The mystic discards the phenomenal universe and endeavors to escape into the real. The occultist, even after he's glimpsed the real, stops on in the world of phenomena and endeavors to bring it under the control of his will. The occultist, while he agrees theoretically with the mystic's proposition, prefers the terms eternal and temporal to real and unreal, for he maintains a thing may be theoretically unreal, yet actually very much in evidence in all practical calculations made in time and space. To this, the mystic replies that the soul is best freed from the temporal by accustoming it to think of everything except the eternal as unreal. In this controversy between occultism and mysticism, one is reminded of the story of the bishop who visited the Sunday school. And addressing the pupils, he said, "I suppose all you little boys and girls want to go to heaven," and waited amid an embarrassing silence until a little voice piped up with the unexpected but very sound answer, "Well, not yet." We might liken these rival schools of thought to two colonists, the one of whom escapes from problems of residence in a tropical and savage land by taking ship and going home, leaving unsolved problems which do not directly concern him, while the other aims on and fights the tribes and builds roads and brings the ground under cultivation. In politics, the one is an individualist and the other an imperialist. In religion, the one is a mystic and the other an occultist. There is much to be said for both points of view. Unfortunately, the differences between occultists and mystics are apparently irreconcilable, because they're a matter of temperament. Like the knights in the old story, they're fighting over a black and white shield, each seeing his side of it and no other. To argue with either of the combatants is a waste of time. Let us rather see how this twofold classification can be used to correlate the different transcendental movements and show their relationship to one another. We're quite aware that each of them claims to have received its teaching directly from God, and heartily damns all the rest, especially such of the rest as are closest akin to it. But the unprejudiced onlooker, knowing something of the workings of the human mind, may perhaps be able to trace sources of inspiration. To say this is not to belittle the message which each founder of a school of thought may have brought to mankind. No man's work is lessened by showing its derivations, for all work must necessarily be derivative at this late day of human history. Everybody is indebted to his predecessors, and it's only the egoistic or the ignorant who refuse to acknowledge this. According to our classification as already defined, we would assign such religions as Buddhism and Christianity to the mystic path, together with such secondary movements as Christian Science and the crop of New Thought, and higher thought schools which have sprung up like saplings from its root. To the occult path, we would assign such religions as Hinduism and Kabbalistic Judaism, also such derivative movements as Theosophy, Alchemy, and Spiritualism. Such a classification must be taken rather as an attempt to clarify understanding by examples rather than to be exhaustive. Probably few of thus assigned will agree as to their inclusion in any classification, it being a peculiarity of inspired organizations to want to be regarded as a special creation, and their works as miraculous. But the unprejudiced onlooker, if there is such a creature, sees them all as specimens in the natural history of the human mind. Still less, we fear, will the examples we have cited like the company to which they've been assigned. Rather will the lion lie down with the lamb than Christian Science and New Thought, or Theosophy and Spiritualism agree to be bedfellows. Nevertheless, the root ideas of all of them are not original, and can be traced back through many different enunciations into remote antiquity, as Madame Blavatsky has so convincingly shown. Having made our primary division, let us now seek a further classification which shall enable us to understand the different tendencies of these two different paths. In mysticism, whose method of approach is by feeling rather than by knowing, we find two broad divisions into nature mystics and spiritual mystics. The nature mystics we may most conveniently denominate pantheists, for they see the manifestation of God in nature and seek union with him through a return to nature. Of these are such of the ancients who sought identification by ritual and invocation with natural forces, and of the moderns, such thinkers as Walt Whitman and Algernon Blackwood. The pantheists may be further subdivided into the beauty and the power schools. The beauty school, of which Walt Whitman is an example, contact nature by their love of her beauty and never employ any ritual. The power school, whose viewpoint is so well expressed in the works of Algernon Blackwood, seek to share in the functions of natural forces, and invariably use some form of ritual, using the word in its broadest sense as actions intended to be symbolic, in order to achieve their aim. The religious school of mysticism seeks its God apart from nature and desires to know him directly, at first intention, as it were, and deprecates all secondary expressions as idolatry. This school may again be subdivided into the path of service and the path of contemplation. The Salvation Army is upon the path of service, and the Carmelite order upon the path of contemplation. The Christian Science movement, to which we have already referred in connection with mysticism, is somewhat difficult to classify at first sight, for it effects service through contemplation and moreover contains a considerable admixture of occult practice, if not of occult principle. We may, however, most expediently assign it to the path of service, for it's essentially a way of redemption through works. Chapter 8. A Ground Plan of Illuminism, Part 2. Occultism differs from mysticism in that it makes no attempt at any direct or immediate approach to its goal, but rather seeks to establish a graded way to the divine union which it recognizes, equally with mysticism, as the ultimate goal of evolution. Working from this standpoint, it neither condemns nor disregards the material conditions in which we find ourselves, but accepts them as part of the soul's discipline and proceeds to study them. First, with a view to harmonizing the soul with its environment, and secondly, with a view to exercising a controlling, or at least a modifying, influence over that environment. It may be alleged that the above is a counsel of perfection, and that occultists seek knowledge and power for their own sakes, and with no higher motive than to manipulate their environment for their own benefit rather than to transcend it. This is undeniably true of many students of the occult arts, but a profession cannot justly be judged by its black sheep. Let us rather consider what occultism is in the hands of its worthiest exponents. The aim of occult initiations, rightly understood, is to lead the mind by a graded way to clear and clear apprehensions of spiritual truth as fast as consciousness becomes fitted to realize them. It's impossible to take the average man direct from his ordinary state of mind into the higher kinds of prayer and mystical consciousness. But it's quite feasible to lead him, step by step, through successive interpretations of a symbol system to such an understanding and realization. This is what an occult initiation should aim to do, and it falls short of achievement if it stops at any intermediary stage on the path and declares that here is the ultimate enunciation of truth. For truth can never be enunciated at all in its ultimate form, as is well known to all mystics. In the end, the occult path must terminate at the mystic goal. It has no end of itself. But as the mystic's way is steep and direct, so is the occultist's by contrast circuitous. But nevertheless, being circuitous, it's graded to a gentler incline. And indeed, it's doubtful whether at the present stage of evolution it would be either possible or generally justifiable to abandon humanity to its problems and go straight up the hill of vision. After all, the occultist remains in touch with the lower slopes, ascending and descending upon the Jacob's ladder of psychism and bearing his brethren company upon their journey. When all is said and done, however, the choice of the mystic or the occult path depends upon temperament. As the old saying goes, it takes all sorts to make a world, and no doubt a world composed exclusively of either the one or the other would prove unworkable. We cannot therefore undertake to contribute to the long outstanding dispute between the occultist and the mystic except by suggestion that both have their place in God's scheme. Having said this much, in the hope of justifying the occultist in his refusal to leave his nets and immediately follow the mystic way, and tried to show that such a refusal is not mere perversity on his part, wherein, having seen the higher, he deliberately rejects it for the lower, but that his refusal may be grounded in a natural necessity. Let us now embark on an analysis of occultism itself. It falls into three primary divisions. 1. Harmonization with cosmic law by means of right understanding. 2. Adjustment of disharmonies by means of the right use of the power that knowledge gives. And 3. Purification of the soul by good works on all planes. All these three things, admittedly, belong to the plane of the phenomenal universe. There's nothing intrinsically spiritual about any of them. Yet nevertheless, they're the first 3 steps of the stair that leads up to the heights of spirit. And it's to be doubted whether those who in any given incarnation essay the immediate way of the mystic have not trodden these 3 steps in earlier incarnations. Under right understanding is comprised the various aspects of esoteric studies which form the theoretical side of occultism. And without this grounding in the theory and philosophy of the subject, Any attempt at its practical application must be a very hit or miss rule of thumb affair. On the theoretical side, the primary study must be cosmogony. Unless the sphere in which the soul evolves is adequately understood, no start can be made in the great work. Such a study must immediately fall into two further divisions: the study of noumenal and the study of the phenomenal, or in other words, the cosmos and the universe. We cannot go further into this division in the present pages, but those who are familiar with the deeper aspects of the subject will realize its significance. Footnote: the reader is referred to the Cosmic Doctrine by Dion, published by the Society of the Inner Light, for details. This study itself has two subdivisions: the descriptive and the classificatory, and the tracing of the course of evolution. In other words, we must approach the subject from its static and kinetic aspects. We must have a clear bird's-eye view of manifestation at the stage to which evolution has brought it at the present moment, and equally we must have a panorama of the course by which it has come, and that by which it may be expected to proceed to its final form. Equally, we must have a clear and detailed understanding of the nature of man. And be it noted that the occultist makes no distinction between the soul and the body, regarding them as too impenetrably interwoven for any such distinction to be possible, but studies them both under the generic title of esoteric psychology. This study again divides itself into that of the normal states of consciousness, the pathological states, the psychic states, and the esoteric psychotherapeutics, which is their outcome. From all theoretical studies, practical applications inevitably spring, and from the study of occult cosmogony arise two very important aspects of the occult arts: the system of correspondences and ritual magic. That form of study known as the system of correspondences has, like all else that's occult, been subject to much abuse and misinterpretation. It's been confused with the doctrine of signatures, which is profoundly misleading. The doctrine of signatures declares that there's an analogy between different things if there's a certain superficial resemblance. For instance, infusions of plants with kidney-shaped leaves were considered once to be good for diseases of the kidneys. The system of correspondences, rightly understood, is very different from this. It's based on the doctrine that the visible is but the shadow thrown by the invisible, and it endeavors to ascertain what it is that is throwing a specific shadow. In other words, esoteric science holds that matter is built up on a framework of spirit, that spirit emanates matter, not matter spirit. Working upon this hypothesis, it seeks to discover what spiritual factor has emanated the particular material object under consideration. In other words, it seeks to find the relationship, the ex-hypothesis, that exists between the seen and the unseen. Further, it holds that the roots of many material manifestations can be found in a single spiritual principle, and that, therefore, these must be interrelated among themselves. Finally, the doctrine of correspondences, philosophically understood, implies that there will be mental and astral states of the said spiritual principle in its descent into matter and mental and astral congeners of its manifestations, and that these are interacting among themselves and profoundly influence the material conditions with which they are allied. A system of correspondences, therefore, consists in the knowledge of the astral, mental, and spiritual affinities of any given object on the material plane. From such knowledge come immediate and practical results. For if the relations and reactions of the subtle planes of the system can be discerned, it will follow that the relations and reactions existing between their physical counterparts will be understood. In the study of correspondences, therefore, is the basis of divination. Divination, in fact, is simply cosmic diagnosis and prognosis. There's nothing more miraculous about it than can be found in the prophecy of a speedy death from consumption after the use of the stethoscope. Data have been rendered available which previously were not available to the unaided senses, and deductions are drawn therefrom in the light of experience. For instance, the prognoses of astrology rest on the known correspondences existing between the planets, which are each associated with the development of certain phases of evolution, and the aspects of the human organism which correspond to those phases. Equally, the divinatory method of the tarot rests upon the deliberately designed correspondences of the tarot cards with the various cosmic and psychic forces and factors. But men are not content merely to understand and foresee. They desire to put their extended knowledge to practical application. And with this end in view, innumerable methods have been worked out whereby, utilizing the principles of correspondences, influence can be brought to bear upon the subtle causative factors in the chain of manifestation. All ritual and all symbolism is designed to produce an artificial set of correspondences with the astral spiritual factor which it's designed to work upon. And by applying the power of the reinforced will to these symbols, to enable it to act upon the subtler aspects and thereby modify their causative action. Magic further divides into white and black, despite the bigoted denials that there can be no such thing as good magic. White magic aims at reinforcing and concentrating the process of evolution and redemption. Black magic seeks to employ the same powers to manipulate causation for selfish ends regardless of cosmic law. The difference between the two is the difference between the art of the doctor and the art of the maker of intoxicating drinks and the poisoner. Ritual magic may well be defined as the therapeutics of the subtle planes. True, the use of therapeutics without hygiene is unsound, and the hygiene of the subtle planes is ethics. It therefore follows that the mistake which is made by many occultists is to apply the powerful alternative action of magic without also employing the hygienic measures of ethical righteousness. But, rightly used, the potent medicament of magic can do for both the soul and society what no other measures can achieve so speedily or so effectually. For it can break the vicious cycle of psychic infection that otherwise would have to be left to the slow processes of time. The difference between magic and meditation methods is the difference between drugs and diet. Medicines will do swiftly what diet can only effect slowly, and in critical cases there's no time to wait for the slow processes of dietetics, so it must either be medicines or nothing. Nevertheless, drugs are no substitute for right diet and wholesome regime. And although magic enables a speedy and potent result to be obtained, it's only by means of right understanding and right ethics that the position which has been won can be held. Black magic differs from white magic not so much in the methods it employs as in the source whence its powers are drawn. White magic seeks to reach upwards and draw down power from above. Black magic seeks to reach backwards into an outgrown phase of evolution and release forces which have long since been equilibrated into a static form. It's as if the burning alkali and acid that went into the making of a neutral base were freed once again. In black occultism, a breaking down of organized form into lower types of force takes place, and the two elements employed for this purpose are sex and blood. The details of these methods it would not be desirable to enter in these pages. In addition to the utilization of these two physical sources of subtle force, the black magician makes use of the evocation of spirits and pacts therewith. The spirits may be the innocent natural forces of the elements, or nature spirits, which he may elect to use for either idle or evil purposes. They may be evil imaginings of men's hearts, which are the evil spirits of the earth sphere, or they may be drawn from that overplus of unbalanced force emanating during the earlier processes of evolution, which form the raw material of those forms of existence, which are known to Kabbalists as the klipoth. Finally, the black magician avails himself of the powers of certain drugs to produce clairvoyance. This subject need not be pursued here, as I have already dealt this in the details of the pages of Sane Occultism. Chapter 9. A Ground Plan of Illuminism. Part 3. As a result of his training, the initiate should develop certain definite powers, and if he does not develop them, it should be reckoned that his training has failed of its purpose. I have no patience with the schools of occultism which declare that they're purely ethical and speculative, and that any attempt at a practical application of their teachings is dangerous and wicked. The presumption may not unreasonably be that they're unable to communicate secrets that they do not possess. Let us consider what a student has a right to expect as the result of his training, provided he himself has done what was required of him. The practical results of the study of occult science may be divided into two aspects: the art of the seer or vision, and the art of the magus or power. The trained occultist ought to be able both to perceive and to act in the invisible worlds. The seership of the fully trained adept includes much more than immediate psychic perception of the subtle aspects of his immediate environment. It includes also the power to range in consciousness through both time and space, to return up the river of time and live once again in the scenes that have passed away. In the literature of spiritualistic research, there's innumerable records of phantasms of the living. The adept should understand the art of producing this phantasm, or astro-etheric form, and be able to do so at will. From the power of the seer to perceive the unseen comes naturally the possibility of camaraderie and cooperation with dwellers in the unseen. These associations are of two kinds. He may merely meet in the passing the denizens of the astral plane, the plane of Maya or illusion, or he may be able to get in touch with the beings of a very much higher type and greater potency. One of the chief advantages of initiation into a fraternity having a long line of tradition behind it lies in the fact that many souls will have entered their freedom through its discipline and be working on the inner planes, and into their camaraderie the newly initiated brother enters. He is therefore in a very different position from the psychic who ventures on to the astral by means of his own unaided psychism. The latter is like a person who comes to live in a great city without any letters of introduction. It'll be a long time before he gets to know anyone, and those with whom he scrapes casual acquaintance will not be among the best of its citizens. Of great importance to the occultist are what he calls his contacts. These contacts are not altogether analogous with the controls of the spiritualist, although the idea has much in common. Contacts are not made so much with individual entities as with orders or fraternities. For instance, a contact may be made with the druidical schools of initiation that existed in these islands in prehistoric times, or with one of the magical schools that existed in the Jura in medieval times. The initiate who holds such a contact will not merely be in touch with the souls of those who were members of that school, but with the forces which they concentrated by means of their ritual. Perhaps a further example will help to make this concept still clearer. The devout Catholic does not pray to the saints for their own sakes, but in order that through their intervention he may come into touch with the powers behind the Christian Church, that is to say, with the Christ, and through the Christ with God. The same principle applies to all occult contacts, though they may not aim at such a lofty source. The contacts which are available for the initiate are of two types, with the elder brethren and with the beings of other evolutions. The elder brethren are those who are freed from the wheel of birth and death and continue their evolution on the inner planes, having nothing further to learn from matter. They're usually referred to generically as the masters, but there's many different types and grades among them. From the soul but recently freed from the body, and undertaking its first simple task as an invisible helper. To the star logoi, the Christs of the rays, for certain of the star lodges are now ruled by the lords of humanity. The beings of another evolution must never be thought of as evil spirits or devils. They're aspiring, even as ourselves, but from a different form of life. We might compare the different evolutions occupying our solar system to the different programs coming through the ether on the wireless. They're all using the ether simultaneously, but we only get that one to which we have tuned our receiving set. Should we, by any chance, get snatches of other programs, we're very much annoyed and declare that there is interference. So it is with our contacts with other evolutions than our own. The accidental reception by our consciousness of their vibrations constitutes psychic interference. But the adept may elect to alter the tuning of his mental receiving set and get the Deva kingdom. The second aspect of the initiate's work concerns the work of the magus, or power aspect. It's often called the ceremonial aspect, because certain formulae are used for achieving its aim. These formulae are used in the same way as the craftsman employs tools in order to reinforce his manual skill. The works of magic could theoretically be done by the power of the mind alone, without the use of any ritual form. But in actual practice, a craftsman might as well attempt to carve a statue with his bare hands. Man is a tool-using animal, even on the astral plane. Magic may be defined as the use of some form of ceremonial, ranging from the simple mantram or spell to elaborate rituals of which the Mass of the Church and the ceremonies of the Freemason are examples. These are two representative types of magic, whatever their exponents may like to say to the contrary. The Mass is a perfect example of a ritual of evocation, and the Masonic ceremony is what it's designed to be, a ritual of initiation, as is well shown in his very interesting books on the Masonic initiation by W.L. Wilmhurst. The whole idea of ritual magic centers about the contacting of a being on the inner planes, who will assist the operation by concentrating a cosmic force of a particular type. If that being is evil, the Mass will be a black Mass, or the initiation that of a black lodge, and the result will be the reinforcing of the corresponding aspect in the natures of the participants. If the being invoked is good, the result will be the intensification of his special virtues in the souls of those who share in the ritual designed to commemorate his life or death. The word of power in any ritual is the name of the being to whom the participants look as the channel of power they are seeking to contact. In addition to the use of words, signs and symbolic movements are also employed. And these are designed to commemorate the most striking or most typical incident in the life of the master. These signs are further crystallized into symbols, which also represent the crisis of that life. For instance, in the Mass, we have the invocation of the sacred name of Jesus, the sign of the cross, made by the devout Christian on breast and brow, and the cross itself, a crucifix, which, when consecrated, is a true talisman. The same principles apply equally to all ceremonial magic, save that different entities are invoked. Whether it's justifiable to do so is a matter of opinion, and the only people who are qualified to express an opinion are those who've had practical experience of ceremonial magic in the hands of competent operators. The general opinion appears to be that the powers thus handled are very high potencies, and that in the event of an accident they can do serious damage. An accident in a high-powered, swift-moving car is a serious matter, and it's not everyone who's temperamentally suited to drive such a car. But the big advances in motor engineering have come through speed tests where, under carefully chosen conditions, specially trained men have established new speed records. We don't say that the 600 horsepower racing car is a suitable road vehicle, but we do say that it's only through the use of these high-powered cars under special conditions that the necessary knowledge becomes available that shall advance engine design in general. So it is with the works of magic. It's to the average devout man seeking spiritual things what the racing car is to the average motorist. Not for him, but the source whence comes the knowledge that is applied in designing the car he uses with so much pleasure and profit. We come now to the vexed question of trance. One can hardly take up a book of advice to aspirants without encountering the most serious words of warning against going into trance. But there's no attempt to explain what is trance. One of the difficulties with which present-day psychic science in the Western world has to contend is the widespread introduction of Eastern methods and systems of development which are quite unsuitable to European conditions. Experiences based on the use of these methods outside their proper sphere do not necessarily hold good for the use of the traditional methods of Western magic. Of the authors who give such solemn warnings against trance, how many actually had experience of it? If they had, they would know at once that there are two types of trance, the negative and the positive. In the negative trance, the consciousness of the operator is put in abeyance. As it were jammed, it's stopped on a dead center, and another mind operates the nerve endings of the physical vehicle by means of telepathic suggestion to the subconsciousness. Whether that mind is incarnated in a physical vehicle or not is immaterial. The process is the same. This method is, of course, open to serious abuse in the hands of the ignorant and unscrupulous, and under such circumstances deserves all the hard things that are said about it. But the fact remains that in clean and careful hands, it's used without evil results, as the records of the wide range of spiritualistic experiments show. It's useless to deny a range of experience as extensive as that available in spiritualistic literature. Positive trance is quite another matter, and is used extensively by every occultist. For certain astral work and for certain functions of the inner planes, the body is left in a profound psychic sleep, which is quite different from ordinary sleep. Even during brief moments of vision, of which most students of the occult sooner or later have some experience, the material surroundings fade from view and one is oblivious of all save the vision. Observers would find during that brief moment that respiration and pulse had altered their rhythm. The eyeballs were fixed and the muscles rigid. If this is not trance, what is? There are a good many shibboleths in occultism which are the result of hearsay, not experience. It's the custom to decree trance, and therefore the people who make use of it are chary of admitting that they do so, lest they be included in the condemnation. But the fact remains that at times consciousness is withdrawn from the physical plane and the body is out of necessity unconscious. To experiment with trance, save under proper conditions and experience guidance, is undoubtedly risky. The occultist has to learn to function on the inner planes. So long as he has a physical body, they cannot be completely his native element, and so he must recognize his limitations. But just as the person who goes in for boating ought to know how to swim in case he falls in, so too the person who attempts practical occultism ought to know how to get out of and return to his body for the same reason. Suddenly to find oneself in touch with another form of existence without knowing how to deal with it is an exceedingly unpleasant experience, even if there be no real cause for alarm. Finally, to sum up, the occultist who's going to undertake any serious work in his chosen subject must be perceptive, must be able to be sensitive at will, and must have a working knowledge of ceremonial magic. To say otherwise is to say what is not true, for occult science is very much more than a system of ethics based on a belief in superphysical planes of existence, the masters, and reincarnation. Chapter 10. The Headwaters of Occultism. Where do occultists look for the source of their science? What are its classics, and when was its golden age? People are sometimes surprised that the occultist should take seriously the scientific views of the ancients, concerning himself with humors and all the jargon of alchemy. All such things, it is said, have been outmoded ever since the Renaissance. Why waste time on such exploded superstitions? The reason the occultist seeks his inspiration in the remote past is because the nearer the source, the purer the stream. The wisdom of the initiates is not so much a body of doctrine that has been built up by experimental research, each worker handing on the fruits of his studies to his successors, as, in large part, a revelation received from other sources than those to which humanity normally has access. This revelation, once received, is developed and applied, but in its essence, it's a gift to humanity brought by the elder brethren. It is, firstly, the garnered fruits of previous evolutions. Secondly, it's the pioneer work of those who've gone on ahead in evolution. And thirdly, it's brought down from planes of existence which human consciousness cannot normally contact. Out of these varying elements, the body of doctrine called esoteric science has been elaborated and adapted to the needs of different ages and races. All its fundamental principles in the present age have been received as the gifts of the gods, and it's only its practical applications that humanity has had to work out for itself. For a proper understanding of the wisdom tradition, we must therefore know something of the means by which this gift of primordial wisdom was brought to mankind. For a force to manifest on the planes of form, it has to be expressed through a form. Otherwise, there's no manifestation. The Christ within functions when we realize, even momentarily, the perfect love which makes all things one. But for the Christ force to function through the group mind, there has to be group realization of its nature, and therefore it is that we have the Christs of the rays, and not one manifestation of an impersonal force for the whole universe and all evolution. Each ray manifests its force in a phase of evolution, and the positive and negative aspects of the rays are the lesser days and the nights of Brahma. The secret wisdom tells us that the rays come into action in turn, like the shining forth of beams from the one light, and of their dawn and dusk the precession of the equinoxes is the cosmic clock. Each ray works out a phase of evolution, and each phase of evolution recapitulates the work of its predecessors before it commences upon its own path. In order to expedite this task, the fruits of the previous evolutions are brought to it by certain entities who are known to the secret tradition as the seed bearers. The entities of each life wave, having achieved equilibrium, are stabilized as coordinated systems of reactions. The lords of the flame are the forerunners of the divas of the elements. The lords of form range from the rulers of building elementals to the geometricizing consciousness who guide Arcturus with his sons, and the lords of mind are behind the laws of biology. The seed bearers who come at the beginning of each life wave are drawn to the evolution immediately preceding. But as the rays represent subcyclic activities, which do not recapitulate, but rather manifest forth a special aspect, the seed bearers to the rays are drawn from the previous life wave, which has a correspondence with the work to be carried out in that particular ray phase of evolution. These seed bearers are known to tradition as the culture gods, and it'll be noted that each of the ancient races has a tradition of a divine progenitor, a priest-emperor who gave its culture. This priest-emperor, being a perfected soul of a previous evolution, is immeasurably superior to the rudimentary consciousness to whom he comes. For, having completed his evolution, he's of the plane of God and intuition. Recognizing this invariably treats him as a divinity because divinity is made manifest in him. He plants in the group soul of the evolving race those archetypal ideas which are faculties. This process is analogous to that whereby the individuality transmits the fruits of its evolution to each successive personality in which it manifests. The civilization thus inaugurated runs its course to the nadir of its material evolution, the point furthest out from God, metaphorically speaking. It's at this point that it has to turn about and come back on the evolutionary arc. And it's here that the star Logos, or Christ of the Ray, comes to it upon the physical plane. Before his coming, the Ray is an outpouring of the divine life, governed by the laws evolved in previous evolutions. But the star Logos says, "A new law give I unto you." The function of the star Logos, incarnating as man, is twofold. Its exoteric aspect is to live the archetypal human life, the life that all men of that ray will live when they have achieved perfection, and thereby to impress that standard of life and action on the group mind. And so he's not only perfect God, being divinity made manifest, but he's also perfect man, or the archetypal ideal of humanity for that phase of evolution. And what he is during his brief earthly manifestation, all men must be when they are made perfect, even as our Father which is in heaven is perfect. The Christs of the rays always manifest on the physical plane during the sub-cycles of the ray, which corresponds in number and color with the ray itself. Thus, it was on the fourth sub-cycle of the green ray, in the fourth sub-race of the fourth root race, that the Manu Narada founded the Temple of the Sun in the city of the Golden Gates in lost Atlantis. The Manu Narada was a lord of mind, for the Atlanteans were evolving the conscious mind. It was in the same way that the archetypal ideas were brought to mankind by the Manu Melchizedek, who was a lord of flame and also of mind. And to this school, it's that the most ancient initiations of our present race are traceable. And therefore, it's that the highest of our initiates are referred to as high priests after the order of Melchizedek. That is to say, they trace back their spiritual lineage to a primordial initiation. Alcohol, whatever may be said of its abuse, was originally the Western equivalent of the soma juice, the means whereby the brain was enabled to respond to the vibrations of abstract mentation, which is the function of this root race to develop, just as the Atlanteans developed the concrete mind and bequeathed it to us. Drunkenness is one of the characteristic evils of Europe. What alcohol was to this subrace, the knowledge of using the endocrine glands will be to the next subrace. This knowledge has long been the secret of the initiate and forms the basis of the yoga breathing system. But exoteric science is now discovering these truths on its own account, and therein are contained the seeds of destruction. It must not be thought, however, that because the Manu of a ray functions as a priest king only at its inception, and the star Logos of a ray as its Christ in the sub-cycle that corresponds in its number of the ray, that humanity is left without guidance. Each sub-cycle of a ray, each sub-race of humanity, has its great one. These entities may be distinguished from the star Logoi by the fact that of the Christs, it's always recorded that they manifested through virgin birth and died the sacrificial death, and in this there is deep occult significance. It may not unreasonably be asked, how can the foregoing statements be verified? No one who's developed rational consciousness can be justifiably asked to accept finally any statement on faith, and therefore, as obliged by the laws of his nature, he demands evidence. No one who's developed rational consciousness can be justifiably asked to accept finally any statement on faith, and therefore, as obliged by the laws of his nature, he demands evidence. The evidence in these matters is based on the law of correspondences. As above, so below. What is true of the microcosm is true of the macrocosm, and what's true of man is true of the amoeba, and what's true of the amoeba is true of the macrocosm. Unless the findings of a psychic fit into the cosmic system they cannot be considered accurate. Therefore, it's that the psychic who's not also an initiate is at a grave disadvantage, for he can never compare his measures with the Great Pyramid. There are no exceptions in the cosmic law. Neither do metaphysics of the different occult schools vary when understood in their purity. And it will be found that the scheme set forth in the preceding pages, though derived from the Western tradition, in no way conflicts with the scheme which Madame Blavatsky outlines in The Secret Doctrine, and which she received from the Eastern tradition. Chapter 11. The Sources of the Esoteric Christian Tradition. The different pantheons of the great cosmic faiths, Egyptian, Greek, or Christian, represent the symbol systems wherein the abstract truths taught by their founders, the sons of God, are enshrined. The Christian is a very abstract system. It has been far less anthropomorphized than most of the others. In Christianity, therefore, we see a very spiritual presentation of the one truth, and for its full apprehension, a very highly developed spiritual intuition is necessary. Consequently, where that intuition is lacking, Christianity makes less appeal, for it lacks the intellectual interpretation which is the food of the concrete mind. And herein lies a weakness of Christianity and its incompleteness. The great founders of the faiths give a spiritual teaching and a spiritual impetus only. It's the priesthoods who subsequently work out the theology and ceremonial. The men who made primitive Christianity were drawn from two sources, initiates of the mysteries and non-initiates. Of the former, St. Paul and St. John the Divine are examples, and the influence of their mystery training can be clearly seen in their work. St. Paul distinguishes between the things which he can say openly to all, and the things at which he may only hint for the benefit of those who can take the hint. There naturally sprang up a keen rivalry between the two types of Christians. Those who accepted the teaching of our Lord without any previous mystery training depended entirely upon spiritual intuition and good works. Those who were already accustomed to the methods of the mysteries sought to express the Christian truths in the language of the esoteric philosophy of their day. The first chapter of the Gospel according to John is an excellent example of the process whereby men already highly trained in mystical knowledge correlated the new teaching with that which was already familiar to them. In this Gospel, we see the influence of the Greek schools of initiation, but in the Apocalypse we see the influence of Kabbalistic thought. The Gnostic schools were the Christian mysteries, made by initiates of other mystery schools who'd converted to Christianity and sought to establish within the Christian dispensation the methods to which they were accustomed. In the struggle between the two types of Christians, the initiates and the non-initiates, the latter eventually gained the day, and forthwith the order of persecution and abolition went forth against the mysteries of Jesus. The orthodox element then gradually developed, as was inevitable, something of a mystery system of their own in the sacraments, which are ritual magic pure and simple, as is agreed even by such an authority as Evelyn Underhill. But with the development of the sacramental system did not, unfortunately, go the metaphysical interpretation thereof. Superstition has been defined as the use of a form whose significance has been forgotten. The sacraments, instead of being the symbol systems of the mysteries of Jesus, approach perilously near to vain observance in the hands of those who regard them with superstitious awe, rather than an understanding of their psychological and esoteric significance. Consequently, there's an unbridged gulf in our modern Christianity between the mysticism of its deep spiritual truths and the symbolic and magical ceremonial of its ritual. This gulf it is the task of the modern mystery schools to bridge. However, these have in many cases re-illumined their fires at an Eastern altar, so that the bridge they build does not lead to the Christian contacts of the West. Those of their followers who seek initiation, instead of having revealed to them the deeper issues of their own faith, have to change their religion and follow other masters. how are we of the West, therefore, to bridge this gulf? We must do what the original Gnostics did: seek to express in the metaphysical language of the mysteries the teachings of our Lord, and thereby establish an esoteric Christian school, the initiation of the West. The Gnostics drew their inspiration from two main sources: the mysteries of Greece and the mysticism of Israel, the Kabbalah, with which our Lord was obviously very familiar. These are the sources wherein we shall find the mental and magical interpretation of our religion, which shall supply the missing keys. The elements which were discarded from Christianity must be replaced if it's to become a true wisdom religion, and unless it can answer to the needs of the intellect as well as the heart, those who need the food of the intellect rather than the heart will seek it elsewhere, and we cannot blame them. Equally, it follows that unless the relationship between occultism and religion is clearly recognized, the sacred science, deprived of its spiritual inspiration, will speedily degenerate on the left-hand path. Occultism, rightly understood, is the servant of religion, and not an end in of itself. Its task is to bring through the astral plane and within reach of the apprehension of our finite consciousness those spiritual forces which, without the concentrating formulae it employs, diffuse and are lost in the sands of mortal mind. Occultism is the method par excellence of manipulating the human mind, and if it be used as the handmaiden of religion, it brings superficial influences to bear in dark places that otherwise would be unapproachable. Let us grant, therefore, that in any school of Western mysticism, the author and finisher of our faith must be Christ Jesus, the great initiator of the West, and that in his name we may safely do that which, unprotected and unsanctified, we dare not attempt. All the gettings of occultism must be dedicated to God's service. Otherwise, there's no justification for this intrusion on nature's mysteries and the forcing of the higher faculties to birth before their time. The highest degree of initiation is crucifixion for the salvation of mankind, the vicarious abreacting of racial karma. Let those who aspire to initiation bear ever in mind what reward it is that will crown their efforts with a crown of thorns. Unless we have so great a love for humanity, so great a sympathy for suffering, that we're not only willing but anxious to avail ourselves of the opportunity in some small measure to offer ourselves as a sacrifice for the sins of people, there's no point in setting out upon the way of initiation, for its goal will be dust and ashes to the man who remains unregenerate. The aim of initiation is neither magical power nor marvelous experience, but simply the ability to offer an acceptable sacrifice that shall be effectual for the neutralization of cosmic karma. As we've already seen, there have been repeated attempts to develop an esoteric aspect to Christianity. Our Lord and some of his immediate followers were unquestionably versed in the Kabbalah, and the Greek and Alexandrian influences had touched most of those who were the builders of the primitive church. These influences crystallized into the Gnostic aspect of Christianity. Later, however, there were other attempts, and the three most notable of these were, first, the School of Initiation, which had for its symbolism the Grail and the Round Table, and drew its inspiration from the Druidical sources. This school disappeared in the general disorganization of society during the Dark Ages. Secondly, the Knights Templar, who, while fighting the infidel of the Holy Land, came in touch with the last survivors of the secret tradition of Israel and from them received initiation. They brought back to Europe the secrets thus gained, giving them a Christian impression, until their suppression in AD 1307. Thirdly, that curious movement which announced itself by the publication of the Fama Fraternitatis. This gave rise to alchemy. A separate book would be required for an adequate study of any of these sources of inspiration, but enough has been said to indicate to the reader where he may look for the headwaters of Western occultism and most profitably pursue his studies. Chapter 12. The Alphabet of the Mysteries. All esoteric systems use a symbolic method of notation in their teachings. Each of the symbols employed indicates a spiritual potency, and these ideas associated with them indicate its method of function. Their interrelation represents the interaction of these forces. If we have the key to one symbol system, we can readily equate it with all others, for fundamentally they are the same. All gods and goddesses in a pantheon, with one exception, represent nature forces and fundamental spiritual principles, for the one is but the obverse of the other. This system of symbology is capable of translation into terms of each plane of the manifested universe. Upon the physical plane, they equate with what we will call, borrowing a term from the East, the mundane chakras. That's to say, the points upon the physical plane where the contact is made between the unseen and the seen. Different types of force have different points of contact. These are represented by the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 7 planets, and the 4 elements, and have their correspondence upon the different planes of existence with the different grades of the celestial hierarchy. The knowledge of these is always one of the carefully guarded secrets of the mysteries, and is never revealed outside their portal. These cosmic symbols are further represented by the letters of a sacred language, which in the Western tradition is Hebrew. Out of these letters are formed the sacred names and words of power, which are simply algebraical formulae resuming potencies. Thus is the universe represented to the initiate, and he's able to trace the correlation between its parts and see what invisible realities are throwing their shadows upon the world of Maya, or illusion. Employing this principle, rituals are constructed which are designed to bring the soul of man in touch with the potencies represented. And divinatory systems are worked out which reveal the combinations and movements of these invisible forces. Don't let it be forgotten that divination, which is the discernment of the unseen, is a very different thing from fortune-telling, to which it bears the same relation as scientific medicine to catch penny nostrums sold at a county fair. In speaking of the pantheons of the gods, it was noted that each god stood for a spiritual principle or unnatural force, with one exception, the sacrificed god, and he stands for the soul of the initiate, to whom he is also the great initiator. The pantheon can, then, be approached from 2 aspects, the external and the internal. It can be discerned in nature or in the soul of man. In its final aspect, the 2 become one. This is the aim of the work of the mysteries. There is no such thing as polytheism, in the sense in which the term is usually understood. A father of the gods is always recognized who is the great first cause of the universe, and from whom all things emanate. We may, however, distinguish between the religions which look upon God as artificer as well as creator, and those who recognize delegation of function to lesser deities. But even in such a rigid monotheistic faith as Judaism, it's recognized that the direct action of God in all matters is inconceivable. And so we get the concept of the divine emanations, or sepiroth, and their manifestation in the 4 worlds of the Kabbalists by means of angelic hosts. In this concept, there's no fundamental difference from that which underlies the Egyptian or Hindu pantheons, save that the angels of the manifestations are distinctly recognized as God's servants, not his followers. The correspondences can be clearly traced between all 3 cosmogonies with the help of astrological symbolism. The student of the mysteries needs therefore to know his cosmic symbolism as set forth in these pantheons. And although he'll take one of these systems as his key system and make it his own, he will be well advised to familiarize himself with others, because each has its own special development and application, and can throw much additional light on the system of his choice. For instance, the deepest natural magic is found to be in Egypt, and the highest metaphysics in India. But if he desires to make practical application of his studies, the initiate must investigate the soul of man as well as the nature of the universe. And the progress of the soul through its initiations he finds symbolized in the life history of the Redeemer or Wayshower, who is for him the Grand Master and Great Initiator. He'll find herein an epitome of the course of the soul, from sensory consciousness to divine union. In the interaction between the different levels of consciousness and the corresponding planes of manifestation lies the essence of occultism. The psychic is one who functions negatively in this interaction. He reacts to the conditions he contacts and thereby perceives them, but he exerts little or no influence upon them. The adept, on the other hand, while perceiving, does not react, and therefore functions positively in his relations to the subtle worlds, sending out his influence upon them instead of receiving their influence into himself. The magician might be distinguished from either of these two as one who knows how to influence subtler worlds, but, being unable to perceive them, is unable to operate directly thereon, and is obliged to depend upon intermediaries whom he evokes to serve his will. The true adept is not dependent on the intervention of spirits, whether divine or diabolical, but himself works directly upon the plane of his choice. And as it's in the evocation of spirits and their subsequent banishment that the chief risks of occultism lie, it will be seen that the magus is a very different position from the magician in his relations with the subtler planes. In addition to his studies of subjects, which are essentially occult, there are other sciences with which the student ought to be acquainted if he's to do justice to his task. For unless he has a working knowledge of them, he is unable to appreciate the significance of a large portion of his occult researches. First and foremost of this is psychology. For without a thorough knowledge of this nature of consciousness, he will be totally unfit to cope with the intricate problems of consciousness which are constantly presenting themselves in the course of his studies, where, as a matter of fact, everything turns upon the nature of consciousness and its relation to the ego and the different levels of manifestation. The ordinary scholastic psychology, such as he would learn if he were going to be a school teacher, will have little interest for him. And after he's learned the simpler lessons in relation to modes of apprehension and the classification of consciousness, he may safely leave the behaviorist school behind and proceed to the investigation of the analytical schools, especially the Jungian, for they will yield him far richer results. After some acquaintance with their methods and concepts, he should investigate the phenomena of hypnosis and suggestion and of hypernormal states in general. He will find that both spiritualists and Catholic mystics have much to tell him on these subjects that will repay his attention. Thus equipped with data which shall enable him to form judgments, he's in a far better position to investigate the unseen than if he ventured forth clad in nothing but the armor of faith. The consciousness of the seer and the powers of the magician are not things apart from natural laws whose operations can be seen and studied in other spheres, as well as those of practical occultism. And it's through this comparative study that most light is thrown on their operation. A working knowledge of anthropology, archaeology, and folklore is also exceedingly valuable. For different systems, especially those existing among primitive peoples at the present day, throw much light on the ancient cultures and enable us to better grasp their metaphysical significance. A general knowledge of physiology is also essential if the relationship between mind and body is to be understood. And the new work in physics is of essential interest of the etheric substratum of the manifested universe. Finally, there should be some training at least in the methods and concepts of philosophy and the findings of comparative religion. Thus equipped, the initiate will have the necessary cultural background to enable him to approach his chosen subject in a scientific spirit and produce results worthy of serious consideration.